I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Time for Teachership podcast. This is episode 207, and today we're talking about Civics for the World to Come, which is a book by Nicole Mira and Antero Garcia, and it is phenomenal. And I got it a few years ago and just fully dived in now. And so I'm very excited for, particularly given the context, I'm recording this on February 5th, and given the context of the presidential administration's executive orders and the kind of culture of fear in educational spaces and being committed to the work for a better future, right? For a more equitable and just future, for civic engagement in young people, right? All the things that we constantly talk about on this podcast. This is a wonderful framework to lean into. And so I want to start by just naming the elements of the framework that the authors present at the beginning. And so they talk about equity and justice and youth agency really being kind of these circles that we're looking kind of at like a 5-part pizza pie with something in the middle, a circle in the middle, and then circles around the outside. And so the outside circles are informed by equity and justice and youth agency. So these are really, all encompassing in all that we do. And world building civic skills are the things that we're going to talk about in the 5 kind of slices. So one is inquiry. And I absolutely love what the authors say, that inquiry is the engine of social change. And I love this because I've been working with the investigating history curriculum, and I've been doing my own research into inquiry-based pedagogy because I wasn't that good as a teacher. And now as a coach, I want to be better and I want to help teachers be better. And this was kind of like the missing link for me. Sometimes it feels like it's inquiry just to ask questions, which is great. And teachers will often tell me, and I think validly, I want students to ask better questions. And so sometimes that feels like, okay, we have these ideas of what good questions are, and we need students to fit into those. I don't think that's it. I think it's missing the social change element, right? It's missing the inquiry for social change. So that felt really affirming. Also, this idea of storytelling, and we're going to dive very far into that in this episode because that is really where the connection of all of my interests in coaching come into play. And I just love that chapter. They also talk about networking in the sense of, community asset mapping and being connected in community and connecting with others and connecting across difference and right, all of these things that are really important, as well as advocacy. And so having students really advocate on behalf of civics education as well. And finally, imagination. So having that kind of civic imagination that's necessary for us to build a better future, right? We have to be able to imagine it and think outside of the constraints of what is possible or realistic and right, all of that. So I love the, creative imagination stems that they said could start a conversation, prompts that would generate conversation in students that invited that creative imagination could start with words like, what if, right? What if we had equity and justice for all? What if, whatever the thing is, why can't the world look like this, right? And insert specific thing you're studying there. So really, really cool framework there. They also have a list of questions that the framework can be considered as if you're more of a questions person. So kind of why are things this way? Whose stories need to be heard? How can we connect with each other? What kind of future do we want to build together? And how do we get there? So I feel like these questions are really helpful to inform all that we do. And then they introduce this cycle of critical civic learning and development, which I also think is really crucial, like these learning skills that we constantly want to foster in students. So we have kind of like developing critical consciousness at the top, identifying multiple identities and perspectives, connecting with one another, with community to pursue social action, resisting injustice creatively. So again, there's that kind of radical imagination, creative imagination, embodying critical civic praxis. So again, all of these theoretical things that we talk about are present in this book. So that's how I knew I would love it right off the bat.
And then diving in, I just want to name, there's so much in here. I highly recommend the book, but I do want to specifically call out that storytelling chapter and use the rest of the episode to dig into that to get really concrete. And so they start with this kind of storytelling lens of individual, interpersonal, and community storytelling. And they invite us to interrogate in our curricula, right, how our students' personal stories can intersect with our class and civic life. How do we design it, right, accordingly? How can we, and I'm adapting these questions here, but how do we support students to engage with the stories of others and really center an understanding rather than being right, right? And what lessons can we apply from the experience of telling our stories to develop more humanizing and I would say healing community? So I love these as kind of the center of this chapter. And I want to name that one of the things that I have been wondering about or thinking about or analyzing as I look at political discourse in news media landscapes is this idea of storytelling being more prevalent on like the conservative political in that sphere, right? We take a story and we say, whoa, there's this story, and then we generate fear or whatever, right? And then the more maybe the liberal or Democrat side of things, we often use facts, right? And we see statistics and, here's the truth and can't you see the truth, right? And it doesn't really work. And so neuroscience is actually showing us, and the authors mention this, that stories are just as likely, if not more likely, to influence citizens than facts. So it's truly kind of this blend, I think, of factual grounding and the importance of human connection and storytelling that these authors are emphasizing, right? We need stories. And stories are what a wonderful way to learn and open up and seek to understand and foster curiosity, right? All the things we always talk about. So one of the things that I really liked is they distinguished the difference between autobiography and autoethnography. And so they gave example questions. They said autobiography would be like, what is your immigration story? Autoethnography would add in that social context. So it'd be like, how does your immigration story reflect and extend the understandings and assumptions about immigration that's reflected in media, public policy, political discourse, right? So it's contextualizing what your personal experience is. And I think that's what we want to get at the heart of. That's how we blend the personal and the political and all of that in a civics classroom is we have to have the personal and we want to analytically think about it and connect it to the wider social fabric that we live in and all of the power dynamics that play there. So I thought that was a really cool, just like very fast way through two definitions to get at the crux of what we often try to do. I also love that they broke down, they give so many samples of people doing this great work in civics classes throughout the book. And one, they're kind of breaking down this one and they're talking about how the process for the student as they talk with other students from different communities who maybe hold different beliefs about certain social or political issues is that first we as individuals have to uncover our own set of values based on our experiences often. So first we have to figure out what are our values, right? And recognize that they're grounded in experience. Then we have to figure out how our values inform our positions on specific issues. So we're going to make the link values to our position, to our opinions. And then we kind of sort through, okay, so we recognize that people's positions and opinions are rooted in values and experiences. So now I have to figure out how I'm going to respond when I encounter other people who have a different value set than me or who have different opinions than me, right? And they give this really clear, simple table that I think makes sense for students to really organize their thinking. So it's just a 3-column table and it's story, stance or values, an argument. And so they say, students can form an argument first if that's where their brain goes. And then they work back to like, what are the values that underlie that argument? What is the story or experience that I have as a person that is informing all of this? Or they can start with story, name the values that are resulting from that story or connected to that story, and then form an argument. And I love this. I often share like a CER, claim evidence reasoning, very analytical, very non-narrative framework and kind of support literacy scaffold for social studies teachers who are teaching argumentation, because this is part of Common Core and we often have to teach it. I like it, it works, and I always find that there is something missing from how we tend to converse and feel like pleased about conversing with human beings in real human interactions. And that's exactly what the authors talk about. It's that we often prepare students with this hyper focus on argumentation. We often prepare people to write essays and argue, and we do not treat them or prepare them to interact with people the way like humans enjoy being treated. And so they specifically lift this up in a story, which is a really cool project, where a bunch of teachers from I think 6 maybe different regions of the United States connected their students virtually, like classes of students. Consider like a very cool version of like pen pals, right? But they specifically connected them to discuss their ideas and beliefs and experiences around specific social and political issues. And the very first bit, the very first interactions were very much like, I'm going to share my stance. I'm going to share a fact. I'm going to, like, it was not at all human to not feel interactive, didn't feel like anyone was seeking to understand. And the teachers kind of got together and were like, what is going on here? Like, we have been teaching in this way, and this is how they think they're supposed to interact in an academic setting or whatever around these issues. And so they kind of unlocked this opportunity for curiosity, and some students like, here's why I think this, right? So they got to the kind of why. Here's why I believe this about gun ownership. This is why I believe this about gun ownership, right? And they root it in their experience, and then they get curious. Okay, well, I've never thought about that. Like, why do you think this? Or what about this? Or can you teach me something about this? One student asked this beautiful question, like, is there any question, something I'm paraphrasing here, but is there anything you'd like to know or any question I could answer for you to help you understand this? I thought, what an adult level kind of move there. But how cool to be rooted in curiosity and storytelling there. And then students are really delving into human connections, human conversation, and seeking to understand more than just like spouting off their sentence and then being done with the conversation. Another piece that I loved in here in the storytelling section was a 4 C's framework. So the 4 C's I could envision guiding kind of the creation of discussion agreements when you co-create these with students. I think these are kind of like the 4 underlying values that you would name, kind of like the baseline assumptions or understandings that I've talked about before on the podcast. So care, connection, community, which they kind of link to a kind of common future. How do we envision a common future together? Where we kind of share points of a vision, and curiosity. Care, connection, community, curiosity. So I love these as kind of anchor points to guiding discussion. I thought that was really helpful. So another thing, I'm going to flip to this page now. Another thing that I love that they talk about, so I have done, like I've called my literacy class critical literacy, which actually they talk about this specifically, this term as, right, this idea of using language to pursue freedom and act against oppressive systems, which I love. And then they specifically talk about media and media literacy and how often it is treated as like a separate subject. It's not embedded, or if it's done as like uncover the bias in this or determine whether this is fact or fiction, which is, I think a good skill, but they go a lot deeper and they make it more civically relevant by saying, here are kind of the 5 questions to invite students to grapple with when we look at media. What story is this piece of media telling about my topic? How is my community framed within this story? How could the story influence public opinion about my topic and my community? Where are the silences or gaps in the story? Like, whose perspectives are not present? And finally, what questions do I need to explore next? So you can see the 4 C's that are present in there, right? There's a sense of curiosity. What questions do I need to explore, right? How is my community framed, right? Whose voices are missing? Like, let's get at that sense of connection and curiosity. And so I just love all of this. And because it is rooted in this idea of very real civic discourse, it is rooted in students' lived experiences of problems that affect their community. it is going to be more engaging. They talk about kind of flipping the traditional dynamic of civics education where teachers kind of come in or textbooks kind of come in and front load. Here are like the ways that democracy works, right? You will memorize these parts of the government, right? And so instead of that, let's instead, as I think all classes could do in all areas and topics, center students' lived experiences and then inquire and learn about the things that underlie those. So, interestingly, one of the studies they cited, Vickery 2017, the study shows that students are actually more than twice as likely to learn about heroes or US virtues than study problems that are affecting the United States. This is wild to me. Like, this is the stuff civics is supposed to be about solving problems. My fellow coach and colleague, Kara Pranikoff, introduced me to Laurel Schmidt's framework, where she talks about social studies events as problem-solving behaviors, which I absolutely love. And it reminds me of this here, right? It's like all of history, all of social studies is trying to solve problems, trying to kind of figure out how we survive, thrive, evolve, how we don't fall into kind of devolving. I love this frame here because it's about the real things that are connected to their lived realities today, right? How do we learn from the past? And the authors do a great job talking about this too, that we are in community, not just with people in the present, but with movements from the past. And we are learning from movements from the past. So just so many cool things in this book. I've just kind of gone on a very long rant of how much I love this. I will leave you with a final piece that I loved from this book, which is Molly, a teacher they mention at the end. She talks about how she teaches the book Malcolm X, and she does this really cool project. So she helps students kind of use the lens or apply the lens of how our ideas evolve and how Malcolm X's ideas kind of evolve throughout the book, right, throughout his life. And so using kind of that lens of as we are civically engaged, as we're in community with one another, as we're learning and seeking to understand through story, like how do we have civil and civic conversations with one another? And so actually the project that students embark on as they read this or after they read this, I can't remember exactly when in the unit this falls, they actually have a conversation about a particular topic with someone who has a different idea. And their goal is to understand, not kind of win the conversation. So some of the examples that happened in this class where students were having conversations with their parents about God and they had like different beliefs. Students were having conversations with romantic partners about abortion and they had different beliefs, right? Like really important, relevant, interesting things that I'm sure led to fascinating conversations with people that they truly love and care for. That was happening in the classroom. Like, how cool is that? And so if this is interesting to you, there are so many directions to head with this, but what I'll do is I'll link the freebie for my 4-part staff meeting series. Kind of the gist is how to talk about things that matter. So the first thing you'll get is a 1-hour agenda with a slide deck of how to co-create values. And now you can do this if you're a leader and you can work with your staff to use it in that way. You can also use this if you're a teacher. Although it is geared toward leaders, you can totally take, and I have used this with students. The next piece is like, how do we talk with one another? Let's introduce the circle protocol, start storytelling, and it'll work its way up to how we talk about current events and political topics, things that are higher emotionally on the scale. So that is going to be linked in the blog post for today's episode. You can find that at lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/207. I'm so excited for all the important work that you are doing, and I want to close with tremendous gratitude for you, on behalf of the families and students that you work with, and thank you. Thank you for doing this incredibly important work in a time when it is hard to do and has never been more important.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.